So just a couple of quick reminders. Tonight is our celebration dinner at 6 o'clock, and 7 o'clock is our AGM, which is also a celebration. And you don't have to be part of Covenant Community to be part of this evening. It's going to be so great. And then next weekend, Good Friday is different than Easter services. So just so you know, some people have been asking, is it the same service? Good Friday, we have 3 services. They're different than the Easter 4 services. So make sure you get your tickets for that. So a couple of weekends ago, my amazing wife, Carolyn, did something a bit shocking, definitely absolutely memorable, a bit daring. For my big birthday, she took me to sailing school in Puerto Vallarta. Now, she could have easily handed me a brochure and said, "Have fun, Captain Todd," but instead, even though she has no particular passion to sail, in fact, she's a little afraid of the whole idea of kind of being out on the big ocean. She wasn't sure if she would be able to grab onto the techniques and the terminology or anything, but regardless, she signed both of us up and volunteered to go back to school with me to learn all about jibs and knots and compasses and sails and quizzes and all this stuff. So for 3 days, the two of us with one other guy were in a small classroom and out on the ocean and learning how to harness the wind and to trim the jib and to avoid crashing into anything expensive. And as exotic and Instagram worthy as that all sounds, you need to know that it kind of came with a catch. And that is that there was a final exam at the end of these 3 days. Not just any exam, it was a pressure-filled 100-question written exam plus an out on the ocean, can you actually sail, practical portion of this exam. And I got to tell you, when you haven't taken an exam for 39 years, you panic. And so I'm looking at this page with all these mysterious words, and my heart was just pounding in my chest. Of course, the teacher stands in the front and says, okay, no cheating, no looking at the textbook, no whispering to your friend. And then you begin to read the questions. What is a shroud? A, B, C, or D? Yeah, we're going to do this right now. I want you to feel the pressure, okay? So this is for you, okay? On 3, I want you to yell the answer. 1, 2, 3. The correct answer is C. Yes, absolutely, C. It is the wires that hold the mast. Question 2. What is a boom vang? A, B, C, or D? You're going to yell the answer on 3. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. B, the rope that runs from the mast to the boom. Question number 3. What are sheets? A, B, C, or D? You're going to yell the answer out on 3. 1, 2, 3. Wow. So A. It is A. Landlubbers love to call them ropes, but on a sailboat, they're called sheets. One last one. What does stand on refer to? A, B, C, D, or E? All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Let me hear you. C. It's obviously C. It refers to the boat that has the right of way. Okay, so there's just 4 questions, and we had 100 of these questions. So beforehand, Carolyn and I are quizzing each other over tacos. We're in our Airbnb, and we have our phone cords, and we're practicing tying the knots with our phone cords, whispering sweet sailing trivia to one another over Starbucks, because when it all boils down to it, the final exam is what matters. Well, this weekend we have reached the end of our 6-week series on Ecclesiastes and the last 2 chapters of Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and 12. If you haven't been here over the last 5 weeks, let me bring you up to speed really quickly. We've been studying this 3,000-year-old book of the Old Testament written by King Solomon. It is undoubtedly one of the most despondent, depressing, confusing, mysterious books. In fact, it had us asking through our study all the way through, how in the world did this book even make it into the Bible? Because it seems to say so many things that the rest of the Bible doesn't say. And just to give you a little taste of this, let me show you what I mean. Meaningless or vanity. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. So I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. all of it is meaningless as chasing after the wind. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. And then listen to this. And I declare that the dead who have already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who was never born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And so we have Solomon's raw and honest musings at the end of his life. And what's so hard to wrap our mind around is this is one of the most accomplished people in all of history. I mean, King Solomon had this super-powered wisdom from God. He had vision and daring kingdom-building abilities. He had more money with a yearly salary of $2.3 billion a year. He had more pleasure with 700 wives of royal birth and 300 live-in girlfriends. He had more wealth with large armies and trading fleets and a private zoo and a palace and treasury than any other human. So why is he so hopeless and despairing? Well, that very question we teased out. We had to give somewhat of the answer at the beginning. Otherwise, we would have never stuck with our study. And now in these final 2 chapters, we come to find where that answer is found. In chapter 11 and 12, there's a powerful mix of poetic reflection, practical coaching and wisdom, and spiritual urgency. In these final 2 chapters, we are presented with the final exam of life. When I was in Bible college, I had a professor, one professor in particular, that loved to give pop quizzes. And I always walked into his psychology class absolutely petrified that today was going to be the day. And he would teach for maybe 15 or 20 minutes and then say, okay, close your books, we're having a pop quiz. And my heart would, again, just pound because I always got so anxious when we had tests. And pop quiz, of course, is designed to wake up the students. It's a call to wake up the sleepy students. It's also designed to find out what a student really knows, not just what they can memorize out of a textbook when they know there's a test coming, but what do they really carry with them? Well, Solomon, in these last 2 chapters, presents us with an unexpected test of the soul. A pop quiz with eternal level questions. It really forms the final exam of life. In chapters 11 and 12, Solomon clears the room, hands a pencil to you, slips a piece of paper in front of you with 3 questions on it, and expects you to answer them. The first question is this: how did you spend your time and energy? One of the things we value a lot around here is actually getting into the Bible and doing Bible study. So we're going to do some hardcore Bible study here together, which means we're going to bite off a chunk of Scripture and take a look at it. Here's what it says in chapter 11, verses 1 to 6. Send your grain across the seas, and in time profits will flow back to you. But divide your investments among many places, for you do not know what risks might lie ahead. When clouds are heavy, the rain comes down. Whether a tree falls north or south, it stays where it falls. Farmers who wait for perfect weather never plant. If they watch their clouds, they never harvest. Just as you cannot understand the path of the wind or the mystery of a tiny baby growing in its mother's womb, so you cannot understand the activity of God who does all things. So plant your seed in the morning and keep busy all afternoon, for you do not know if profit will come from one activity or another, or maybe both. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, I went ahead to do some analysis on this chapter, or this part of the chapter, and I found that in these 6 verses are 7 sources of uncertainty. Number 1, uncertain outcomes. You send your product across the sea, and you're never sure if someone's going to put tariffs on them, and if you're going to get any profits out of them at all. Number 2, unknown risks. Diversify, he says, because you never know when there's going to be a trade war that erupts. Number 3, uncontrolled events. You cannot predict if there's going to be a tornado or a hurricane or hailstorm or wildfire. Number 4, unreliable weather. Do not wait for perfect conditions because they will never come. Number 5, unexplained mysteries. Reality is layered with complexity that remain outside of your understanding. Number 6, unfathomable divine activity. You have no idea what God is up to behind the scenes. And number 7, unpredictable results. You don't know which of your initiatives will be successful. So having come to this understanding and helping us to understand that there are a lot of uncertainties in life, what is Solomon's point? Well, it's this, and it comes in that last verse. Live boldly in the midst of uncertainty. Live boldly in the midst of uncertainty. Don't spend your life waiting. Live boldly when you don't even know what the outcome will be. Church, every single one of us has barriers in front of us. There are these walls that are so high and so thick and so wide that we just can't seem to get through them or around them. So what we end up doing is we end up giving up. We set up camp in the shadow of these intimidating walls. What are the walls made of? What are the bricks that make up these walls? Well, they're everyday common things in our lives. Insecurity, intimidation, negative thoughts that go around and around and around in your head about yourself, self-doubt, fear of risking, fear of stepping out, fear of failure, and uncertainty of will you ever be able to get through that wall, and if you did, what might lie on the other side? We all have these barriers in front of us that are holding us back. Chuck could tell you a thing or two about impenetrable walls. On October the 14th, 1947, as the sun was rising over the California desert, Chuck came limping and kind of wincing out to his airplane. You see, the night before, he had been riding his horse, and he had got bucked off, and he broke 2 ribs. But today was a big day, and he wasn't about to let that stop him. So he winced and climbed into his rocket-powered aircraft and strapped himself into the cockpit that was no bigger than a coffin. Appropriate, he thought, because if this does not go well, that's exactly where I'm going to end up, in a coffin. You see, Chuck Yeager was going to attempt to break the sound barrier. Now, today, for us, that doesn't sound like any big deal. But back in 1947, it was a different story. In 1947, the sound barrier was impossible to break. Chuck and many others had attempted it. And they would get up to about 680 miles per hour in their airplane, and terrible things would happen. The plane would begin to shake violently. The gauges would begin to spin out of control. The metal of the plane would shriek and stress, and sometimes the engine would even flare out, and the wings felt like they were going to be torn off. In fact, 1 year earlier, Jeffrey de Havilland had tried to punch through the sound barrier, and his plane had disintegrated in the air, proving to everybody that the sound barrier was not meant to be broken through. Chuck Yeager, though, thought maybe he could do it. He also thought this might possibly be his last flight or his last few minutes of life on Earth. Yeager ignited the rockets, the plane surged forward, and sure enough, the violent shaking began. The gauges began to go wild and spin. The metal began to shriek with stress. And he kept his eye on the gauge, Mach 0.93. He pushed it a little harder. Mach 0.95. He pushed it a little harder. Mach 0.965. And then the gauges froze. And he pushed it a little bit harder. And when the gauges came back to life, he was at Mach 1.06. He had just broke through the sound barrier for the very first time. And this is what he said later on. He said, "There should have been a bump, something to let me know I just punched a clean hole through the sonic barrier. The unknown was a mere poke through jello." In other words, it was no big deal. In fact, he even talked about how let down he felt, that there wasn't a bigger something. It was actually pretty easy. It turned out that the sound barrier was not an impossible wall in the sky, but rather a barrier in their minds. So, what is your barrier? What's your wall? What's your impossible sound barrier? What is it that you keep bumping up against that you think is so big and you could not break through? A new job or education opportunity? a dream that is so much bigger than you, a calling to make a difference in this life, a bold move that requires you to quit something in order for you to start something. Maybe for you it's a hard conversation. Maybe for you it's a leap of faith as you know God is calling you to something, but you have just seen it as a big barrier. What is it that is your impossible wall? The sound barrier didn't disappear because Chuck Yeager became stronger or better or figured out a better technique or conditions improved. It disappeared because he kept going. And that's what Solomon says here in verse 6. He says, keep going, planting and harvesting and breaking through all those uncertainties. For Chuck Yeager, it disappeared because he leaned into the shaking and ignored the spinning gauges, and he risked everything to break through to the stunning other side. The first question that Solomon is asking us in these chapters is, how did you spend your time and energy? Did you spend your time and energy on earth cowering in the shadows of the invisible barrier, afraid and hesitant and living small, or living a daring life of faith even though there were many uncertainties? Well, the second question comes out of chapter 12, verses 1 to 6. Again, we're going to do some Bible study here. It's a bigger passage, but this is what it says. Don't let the excitement of youth cause you to forget your Creator. Honor Him in your youth before you grow old and say, life is not pleasant anymore. Remember Him before the light of the sun, moon, and stars is dim in your old eyes. Remember Him before your legs start to tremble. Remember Him before the doors of life's opportunity is closed and the sound of work fades. Remember Him before your hair turns white like an almond tree in bloom and you drag along without energy like a dying grasshopper. Remember Him before you near the grave. Yes, remember your Creator now while you are young, before the silver cord of your life snaps and the golden bowl is broken. Okay, lots of words. We need to wrap our minds around this. What do we see here? Well, in this passage, we see one recurring word over and over again. It tells us there's some urgency around this word, and the word is remember. Number one, remember God in your youth. Number two, remember before your eyes are dim and you lose clarity. Number three, remember God before your legs start to tremble and you lose your strength. Number four, remember God before the doors of opportunity close and you get older. Number five, remember God before your hair turns white or you lose all your hair. Remember God before you start nearing the grave. And number seven, remember God before your life ends like the snapping of a silver cord. So I think if we were to ask Solomon, hey Solomon, is this going to be on the exam? He's going to say, absolutely. In fact, here's how it's going to be worded on your exam. Question 2, have you remembered your Creator? The repetition of this word remember in these 6 verses emphasizes the urgency and the intentionality. In fact, it's Solomon's way of calling us to action now. There's an urgency about it. This remembering isn't just a nostalgic perusing through a photo album and feeling some warm fuzzies in your soul. No, instead, this remembering that Solomon is calling us to is more like, listen, there are 1,000 distractions in this world, and every one of them is going to try and pull you away from God, to cause you to ignore God, to neglect God, to drift away from God. Don't let them. It will take effort, but remember your Creator. Keep your heart, your attention, your energy on God, especially while you are young. And then as you get older and life's responsibilities and difficulties pile up upon you, remember God, because your soul needs reminding. You know, occasionally around here we sing an old hymn called Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. And it was written by a young adult, actually. He was 22 years old, a guy named Robert Robertson, back in 1757. And Robert had lived a wild and difficult life. At the age of 5, his father had passed away, and his family kind of abandoned him, and so he was bounced around. And when he was 17 years old, he recalls that he walked into a church with the intention of mocking the preacher. Instead, he walked out having given his life to Christ. And 5 years later, he was a passionate pastor, 22 years old. And he began to write hymns, and he wrote these words, "Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise." And then later on, he writes, "Oh, to grace, how great a debtor, daily I'm constrained to be, like thy goodness, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above." These words would become hauntingly prophetic. You see, Robert's life got difficult. He was married. They ended up having 12 children. That's a lot of mouths to feed. He began to have doubts in his theology. And so he quit the pastorate. He quit preaching. He quit reading the Bible. He quit going to worship. His heart became hard and cold. He wandered away from God. His cynicism grew, and he forgot his Creator. It said that one day, towards the end of his life, he was in a stagecoach, and there was a young lady in the stagecoach with him, and she was humming under her breath. And she turned to Robert and she said, "Sir, do you know this hymn? It's so beautiful. It always lifts my heart." And then she began to quote the words, "Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." And it said that Robert's eyes filled with tears. And he stammered to the woman, "Madame, I am the poor, unhappy man who wrote that hymn many years ago. And I would give 1,000 worlds if I had them to feel now as I did then." You see, along the way, he had forgotten his Creator. His faith had grown cold. He had gotten old. Life had become difficult. His joy had faded. His clarity had dimmed. His passion had cooled. And his strength had waned. And Solomon, in this passage, is not just waxing eloquent in Ecclesiastes 12. He's sounding the alarm. He's saying, don't wait. Don't drift. Don't forget. Don't postpone. The world is loud and the world around you is fast, and it will have your mind spinning out of control, and your heart is so prone to wander. But there's something so sacred about you reminding your heart to remember your Creator. By way of review, and yes, this will be on the final exam, question 1, how did you spend your time and energy? Cowering in the shadows of the impossible walls, or daringly with faith, punching through and enjoying life even in the midst of uncertainties and following God? Question 2, have you remembered your Creator? Or did you allow the gravitational pull of life and circumstances and difficulties to pull you away from God? In old-fashioned terms, have you backslidden? Haven't heard that word for a while, have we? Have you slid back from where you were? Began to let go of some of the faith habits and the spiritual disciplines and the passions and the ways of vibrantly calling your heart back to your God? Which leads us to one final question in Solomon's last 2 chapters, Ecclesiastes 12, 13 to 14. These actually form the final 2 verses in the entire book, and this is where we get this idea all along that we need to be worshiping our God, even though he talks about many difficult and depressing things in this book. Here he comes, brings it all home. Verse 13, that's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. Throughout the entire series, we've been alluding to this passage, these last 2 verses. And we said it in terms like this. Solomon has been saying all the way through this book that if you are only focusing on the things under the sun, If you are only looking from a human perspective, if your heart is only passionate about the things under the sun, then you're missing the point, because life does not mean anything without the meaning maker. So don't aim for things under the sun, but rather set your sights on the one who is above the sun. It's in these two verses that we get this concept. And the third question of Solomon's final exam for life is this. Number 3, did you live in reverence and obedience to God? Solomon in this passage literally says, are you living with the fear of God in you? Now, we often get confused with that term, fear of God. This is not the kind of fear that is like a run away from God sort of fear. In fact, the ancient word here for fear is yareh. It's the ancient Hebrew, and it doesn't mean running away like as if you were meeting a Tyrannosaurus Rex in Jurassic Park. It's not that kind of fear. Rather, this is a kind of fear of standing in awe. Standing in awe before your God. It's sort of like the kind of fear like you're standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Have you ever been to the Grand Canyon? I remember the first time I ever went to the Grand Canyon, I literally reached my hand out because it looked like a picture that was painted. It looked so surreal. It was so absolutely mind-blowing. Did you know it's a dangerous place, though? Every year, 15 to 17 people die at the Grand Canyon. In 2014, it was 26 people. They die of heart attack, of heat exhaustion, of dehydration, of falling off the edge. To stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon is to stand humbled in the midst of grandeur, absolutely overwhelmed in awe, awestruck by its beauty, and suddenly you feel so small and so fragile. That's what yareh means. It's not a fear that makes you run away in terror, but rather a fear that makes you stand in wonder, stirred with majesty, sobered by how small you are in comparison to what you are looking at. Does it make you want to obey the laws of the Grand Canyon? Absolutely. But not out of terror or panic, but rather out of a holy trembling, because you are standing in front of something so pure and so powerful and so perfect that it makes you want to bow down and shuffle just a little bit closer, not run away. Imagine that you were standing in front of the one who created the galaxies, who spoke the universe and this world into existence. Imagine that you're standing in front of the one who knows every single one of your thoughts and was there when you made every single one of your choices and decisions. Imagine standing in front of the one who knows the exact numbers of hairs on your head, the one who can tell you exactly how many heartbeats your heart will beat before it beats no more. Imagine standing in front of the one who knows all this, standing face to face, and then giving an account for what you did with those heartbeats that he gave you. And yet, imagine knowing all of this, he chooses to love you and protect you and shield you and save you. That does not terrify you or scare you, but rather it makes you want to fall to your knees in worship and obey him. We obey God not because he threatens to smite us. We obey God because of how far he went to love us. Solomon wrote these 12 chapters 1,000 years before Christ was born. In other words, he had a pretty good grasp on what the final exam would be like, and he says there will be a final judgment, there will be a day of reckoning, there will in fact be a final exam, but he maybe didn't have the whole picture. So he gives us 1,000 years before Christ, he gives us some really great questions. Question 1, how did you spend your time and your energy? Question 2, have you remembered your Creator? Question 3, did you live in reverence and obedience to God? But what Solomon could not have known was that 1,000 years later, or 2,000 years ago for us, God's own Son, Jesus Christ, would walk into Jerusalem on this Sunday, Palm Sunday, not to bring judgment, but to bear it. I think Jesus today would say, Solomon got it so right. Yes, absolutely. Spending your time and energy living by faith is important. Remembering your Creator and not drifting from God is vitally important. Living in reverence and obedience to God is incredibly important. But I think Jesus would also say, but you know what? I'm going to rewrite the exam. And I'm going to just make it one question. And here's the question. Did you give your life back to God, placing your faith and your hope on what Jesus Christ did on the cross? In other words, is Jesus your Lord every day? And is He your Savior in every way? You know, Palm Sunday is a powerful reminder of how fickle humanity is. Excited about Jesus one minute and calling for His crucifixion the next. Palm Sunday is a powerful reminder of how easily we get things mixed up, looking for power when He brings sacrifice, looking for a throne when He brings a cross. But Palm Sunday is also a great reminder that Jesus knew all about our struggle with faith, and yet He still rode in and came on a mission to take away the sins of the world. Let's make that more personal. He came on a mission to take away my sins and to take away your sins. The final exam one day that every single human being will have to take will not be, are you able to recall the story out of the text? But rather, do you personally know the one who wrote the story? Do you personally know the one who took your place and conquered the grave? So back in Puerto Vallarta, Carolyn scored 95% on that test. I scored 99, and we found out that it wasn't quite as hard as we had thought. But I will tell you that this final exam is impossible. The final exam of life, no human being can pass on their own. But thankfully, Jesus was willing to take the test for you and apply His score to your transcript if you will only trust Him. So in the end, I'll say it one last time. The book of Ecclesiastes is hard to understand. Solomon spends most of his time pointing out to us that if you are simply living for the things under the sun, it's all vanity. You're simply chasing the wind. You can have the pinnacle of experiences and wealth and pleasure as he did, and you will come to the end of your life and say it was all a waste of time if you have missed out on the meaning maker. So don't worship the things under the sun. Don't live for the things and go after the things under the sun, but rather tune your heart to the one who created the sun. Let's worship together.